Good evening and welcome to Your Vote 2017. Welcome to the program. As of this afternoon, we are up to 20 candidates having been declared across the country. The latest is Elias Kapavore of PNC candidate, who now brings PNC's total to 7 declared. Now we look at the graphic of the spread of declared candidates so far, and while the older, more established political parties are seeing sitting MPs retaining their seats, there is also a growing number of independent candidates who are proving that there are those who have voted for change. As this continues to play out, we have also seen several contentious issues, both in the polling phase of the elections and now into counting. Glad you could join us on Your Vote 2017. I'm Neville Choi.
And I'm Titi Gabi. Tonight we look at some of the main challenges that have come about in these elections and how the PNG Electoral Commission has and continues to deal with them. Joining us on the program is PNG Electoral Commissioner Patilias Gamato. Mr. Gamato, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Neville and Titi, and the viewers across the country.
We know that you're a very busy person, and we thank you for coming on the program tonight. There are a lot of unanswered questions that we would like to discuss tonight. Of course, the major one would be the electoral rolls and the questions around that. Has something gone wrong with the electoral rolls, and why has it?
Well, let me first of all say that when we started off by doing the roll updates, we used the 2012 roll as the base roll. So we didn't discard the 2012 roll. And when we were doing it in 2017, we were updating the 2012 roll. Unless, of course, the former commissioner ordered a new roll. Then we would have gone straight into doing a new roll for 17. But it was an update of the 2012 roll. So 2012 and 2017. For 17, we basically allowed our enrollment agents to go out and enroll new voters by using what we call form number 11, claim for enrollment. Okay, these forms are prescribed forms under the election regulation. So we use those forms to go out. So in total, we released about 850,000 forms to update the 2012 for 2017 election. And so there was a process we followed. Okay, so I know people are complaining about rolls and their names not on the roll, but there was a process that we followed. And it would be interesting after election for us to go there and do a postmortem on the roll and see what really went wrong. But it would be also very important to see whether there was a decrease in the roll and decrease in the number of voting. Okay, because in 2012, about 4.8 million people were on the roll. And the actual number of people who came and voted in the 2012 national election event was 3.7 million. So I'm just watching the figure, and in fact, it's going up. So it would be also interesting to see those things and do a postmortem to see what really went wrong. But as I said, we followed a process to update the rolls in 2017. Unlike the past elections in 2007, 2012, there was no objection made available for people to come and object the roll. For 2017, we allowed for people to come and object the roll.
From the exercise you carried out, Commissioner, what were your figures for the 2017 voting population?
For 2017 voting population, I was looking at about 5.2 or 5.3 million people to be enrolled on the electoral roll.
The eligible voters.
Eligible voters, yeah. And then my estimation for people who would come to vote, actually vote, would be about 4.1, 4.2 million. I'm just watching those figures. So after the counting, everything is done, then we can go back and check.
Okay, so let's explain the 10 million ballot papers that were printed in Indonesia. Did they take into consideration the LLG the elections as well, or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
10 million is basically 5 million for the open seat and 5 million for the provincial seat.
Okay, so this.
Okay, so we estimated at least above the numbers that we thought, because we didn't want to order below the estimated figure. So we wanted to order enough so that there is enough ballot paper. We also ordered what we call generic papers, about 150,000 generic papers. Just in case something went wrong, we had to use the generic papers. Okay, so that's basically what how much we ordered.
Are those ballot papers?
Oh yeah,
the generic paper.
Yeah. Ballot papers, generic ballot papers. The normal ballot paper would have the name of the electorate on the ballot paper, printed, printed, not handwritten, printed. The generic ballot paper would not have the name, but it's still a ballot paper with a serial number issued from our office.
Okay. Now, how were those ballot papers distributed throughout the country?
They were basically distributed according to the enrollment figures. After the final figures came out. But in some places there are less number of people in the final figures, so I ordered for use of what you call preliminary roll. The preliminary roll is basically the updating of the 2012 roll with the forms that went out and came back. After the figures are entered into the electoral roll, they're then called preliminary roll. Okay, after the preliminary roll is printed, the preliminary roll is then displayed for people to come forward and object. Okay, and then after they object, then there is a final roll. There is a final roll. So as I said, there is a process that we follow. We follow a process. So in some cases where they said our names are not on the roll, I said go back and use the preliminary roll, because that would still have your name on there.
It appeared polling officials had different instructions at different polling booths. For some did allow voters to use the 2012 roll, and others just instructed them to go home. So many people would tend away at the booths.
No, we never used 2012 roll, because 2012 roll is a roll of the previous event, election event.
Yes.
What we called was the preliminary roll. Okay, I think there is a confusion between use of 2012 roll and the preliminary roll.
Okay.
Okay, the preliminary roll is the update of the 2012. Because we didn't want to use 2012 because it's a previous event, previous election event.
All right, Commissioner, before we continue, today we hear there are more allowance-related delays from police in Madang and polling officials in the nation's capital. And in North Wagi, candidates and the supporters are protesting your decision to count the 5 disputed ballot boxes. Yeah. So, we're going to see some vision now, and we can see this. So, Commissioner, this is in Mount Hagen today, and they're protesting against, in Barnes, at Barnes Station, and they're protesting your decision to count these ballot boxes. It's a current issue, and a lot of people are watching what happens next. You've yesterday said that you'll be approving the counting of these boxes, with the exception of one. Can you just elaborate more on that?
Yeah,
please?
that's true, because when I made a decision on Friday, 14th of July, I said to put the 6 boxes aside. But then on the same day, I got legal advice from Solicitor General's office. The Solicitor General have placed their lawyers on each of the counting places across the country. And so they are available there to provide advice to us. Yeah, so as soon as I got a written advice from the Solicitor General, I had to make a decision. Because the amateur video footage that was shown on the social media and the mainstream focused on just one. And these legal officers were on the ground as well. So when they wrote to me and said, no, you have to allow the 5 boxes to be included in the count, I had to make my decision. I had to change that decision to make the decision so that the 5 boxes can be counted. If anyone is protesting against that decision, they can take me to court, take the Electoral Commission to court. But my position is that there could be some valid ballots in the 5 boxes. And if I deny that, then I'm denying the rights of people who casted their votes into those 5 boxes. Okay, so on that basis, I said, no, allow the 5 boxes to be counted. Only the one that had the footage, they can set it aside.
But then right now in Barnes, with this situation, it is tense. and anything could happen at the moment. Is there they're giving you an ultimatum. Will you be answering to them?
I cannot, because my position as the Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Office is that I make one decision and that's it. I'm not a court, and people must understand that. They can bring the petition to me, and if I make a decision and if I say no, the next avenue is to take the matter to court. And I appreciate what people are saying, and they're protesting, but I think the common sense should prevail in that they can express their views, their disputes in the court of law. In that way, then we can call for evidence, proper evidence. And they can bring the evidence forward, and we'll obviously bring our evidence forward too from our presiding officers, even the security forces who were there witnessing the count. So in that way, we do it in an orderly manner, instead of taking the streets and fighting, protesting. And for me, I have limited time to deliver the election. The process of counting must be allowed under the law to be completed, so that any disputes that can appear after that can be considered by a legitimate court, the Court of Disputed Returns.
The ballot boxes aside, have you identified the persons that carried out that multiple voting, so it seems, in the video? Are they Electoral Commission officers?
That I cannot say at this stage, but I think if there's an investigation into it, obviously the police were there, and they can call for investigation and identify the people who were actually involved in that.
And of course, the polling station was located under a house inside Defence Force Barracks.
Well, the gazetted place was Single Rock Barracks. Okay, it's that barracks, the fence around that barracks. So wherever they conduct, that's still okay. Yeah, but a declared place or the gazetted place is the Single Rock Barracks.
Okay, the situation has also occurred in Port Moresby last night, was it, Neville? The arrest of the NCD election manager?
Oh yeah,
what's the outcome of that?
I was informed of that, and I think the basic complaint was that once scrutiny continued to intimidate him, and as a person he lost control and he slapped him. So that guy went and complained to the police, and the police came and picked him up and got him charged. So that's a police matter. I'll allow that to go through, but he's still election manager and he has to complete his job. Yeah. Yep.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but we did have a situation today where our journalist in Madang, Martha Lewis, she's our provincial correspondent there. I think the election manager over there banned her from taking pictures and threatened to smash her camera. And we had, last night, because of Mr. Jimmy's altercation, our reporters were told that they weren't allowed, the media was told not to be allowed to take mobile phones into the counting center. Is that rested with the election manager to me?
No, I think it's, my position is that we have to make the election transparent as much as possible. We allow observers to come in and observe, and we allow journalists to go in and report. So for me, as Electoral Commissioner, I would allow transparency in the counting center or even at the polling stations. I think whatever happened is the situation that the polling official or the counting official, allowed that to happen. It doesn't in any way reflect my position as Electoral Commissioner. I would want to see all the observers observing. I would want to see journalists in there reporting, and I think the journalists and the television and the mainland media have done a good job in reporting the results coming back to us, both the radio and the mainstream media.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll go to a break now. You're watching YourVote 2017. After the break, for all the election results, you can also visit the Facebook page, YourVote 2017. We'll be back with more with Commissioner Gamato in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Your Vote 2017, and we are with Patilias Gamato, Electoral Commissioner of Papua New Guinea. Commissioner Gamato, thank you very much again. Now, we'll talk some numbers now. Everybody's talking about the fact that of the 3 first declarations that have come in, people are saying that there's a voting population that everybody knows about with one figure, and there's also the number of votes that these candidates came home by. And the difference is what's got people discussing. So we'll have a look at the figures now. So we had James Marapra for Tari Pori, and this is from the Electoral Commission website. Winning total was 30,000. Total votes in the electorate was 60,000. But the roll summary figure says 41,000. Of course, there's something else with the second one, and we have a roll figure of 69,000. Total votes in the electorate of Mosby South was 37,000, and the winning total was 19,000. And then with Dr. Alan Marat, you'll see the spread there. We had a roll summary figure of 22,000. Total votes in the electorate, 9,000, and winning total was 5. Yeah. There's been some discussion, there's been a lot of talk around this. The figures of the roll summaries that we're referring to here were made available to international observers by the Electoral Commission. And even though they have noted that, there are still people out in the public sphere who are discussing this. Can you explain it for us and for our viewers, please?
Yeah, basically for the election, I would say there's a lot of moving parts. And when I say moving parts, you look at situations where you have the final roll, and people will come up and say, hey, listen, my name's not here. So at one stage in the course of the election, in the course of polling, I had to issue instructions for people or the polling officials to use the preliminary roll. Okay, so in this type of situation, you would see the figures there. And so the roll summary, although it's shown, but in actual fact, when they're using, it would be interesting which role they used, presiding officers. Okay, so in this particular case, we would be looking at our prescribed form called Form 66A and 66B, because that's where we record all the votes. The returning officer records all the votes that's counted from each box. Okay, so when the returning officers are doing their returns, they will then work out how many ballot papers they used, how many votes were used. And when we are talking about votes, we're talking about 3 choices. It depends when you declare a member. If it's by primary count, then that's, but if he goes into elimination process, you'll be using the second vote and the third vote. Okay, so when I say moving parts, there's a lot of moving parts there. Okay, so the first thing is that we have to establish which role the returning officer used on the day of voting. They would start with the final roll, but then if there is a situation where they have to use the preliminary roll, they have to use the preliminary roll because some names were not on. And as you know, people came to say, oh, my name is not on the final roll, want to use the preliminary roll. So you'll see that the preliminary roll might be higher or greater than the final roll. And so the final document or final source document we use in terms of this type of analysis is to look at our Form 66A and 66B. 66A is the preliminary count or primary count. 66B is the record of the elimination process. Okay, so in that way you can then work out how many ballot papers are used, how many people actually voted. Okay, so I'm now asking for these documents to come. As soon as the returning officers come and return reads, they return their returns to us. And that includes the 66A and 66B so that we verify these figures.
Okay, the 3 examples we saw here were all declared on the primary count, were they? So will you still need a Form 66A and B?
Oh yeah.
Were they
we'll still use 66A and B to verify because first of all, the 66A would also indicate to you how many boxes were used and how many ballot papers were in the box. Okay, that's important. Okay, so from there, when they open to count, they would then bring that information out. And it's recorded on Form 66A to do the primary count. And then after the primary count, if they're going into elimination process, then they use 66B.
Commissioner, would you rule out foul play and multiple voting and all that with the figures we're seeing?
No, I cannot rule that out because obviously there's been some, multiple votings, and it happens in PNG. It happens here. I cannot say it never happened. Okay, and so some people double voted. Okay, multiple voting.
How do we get around it? Because we also have the case of block voting in certain regions in the country. Now, is that illegal?
Block voting is illegal. Multiple voting is illegal. But people still get around to do that. It happened in the past elections, not just this election, but in the past elections. So there's a lot of challenge for us as election management body. And hopefully after the formation of government, we could look at some reforms. And these are some areas that I'm looking at. And what I said is that I wanted to want an investigation into the role itself. So we try and get independent people to come and look at our role. And then from that report, it will help us as a country to organize ourselves, prepare for the 2022 election. And if need be for us to possibly bring in biometrics voting system, it would help because in one of the provisions in our law, the organic law on elections, there is a clause for biometrics, fingerprint voting. Mm-hmm. We have not used that in the past, but it's already in the law. So I think it's about time, and seriously, if we are going to talk about elections and especially voter registration and voter verification, it's important to go into that so that we can strengthen our voting system.
All right, well, we obviously have, and we'll discuss this later, an audit process of the whole elections after, in the months following the return of writs. But at this point, and with all the challenges, legal and non-legal, that you're facing in your office, is there still a need for the Electoral Advisory Committee? Because they've said that they've resigned. Have you received their resignations? And what happens now between now and the end of or the issuing of writs, or after that for the other areas that are still counting by then?
The Election Advisory Committee, the Election Advisory Committee is a committee established under our law, the Organic Law on National Elections. But in the past elections, we never had an Election Advisory Committee. I'm referring to 2007 election, 2012 election, 2013 LLG election. And this is for the first time that we wanted to bring this committee in. I think the main role of that committee is to look at elections generally and make recommendations to me as Electoral Commissioner. If in their view they think this electorate should be failed, then they recommend to me.
In the absence of the EAC now, who does
that? In the absence of the EAC, the Electoral Commissioner does that. And their role is only to recommend to me and say this electorate needs to be failed because of electoral fraud, violence, or because of tampering of ballot boxes and papers. Those are things. So the source of gathering information is not just Electoral Commission. They need to look at other sources as well if they are to work. And for that matter, they have to look at sources like the police to give intelligence about security and possible violence. They need to look at the provincial government, especially the Provincial Election Steering Committee. These are other sources. But for us, it's unfortunate. They asked for information. We provided that information. We provided some information to them. But they went out and said, we didn't provide information, so because of that, they resigned. But there was some source document we gave to them.
So ever since then, have you met with the members of the inaugural EAC?
No, let me say when they resigned on television. They never formally wrote to me and said we are resigning from the Election Advisory Committee. It's a very important committee. I'd like to see in the future elections this committee is established and given enough resources and time so that they can work to assist the Electoral Commissioner. And as I said, the primary role is basically to look at situations on the ground and recommend to the Electoral Commissioner that this electorate is going to fail, and these are the grounds that we think they'll fail. But the decision to fail election in one electorate still lies with the Electoral Commissioner. I can reject the report, I can reject the recommendation, and I'll say no, allow it to pass through.
Okay. So one of the things that the EAC committee members, we had them on the program, and one of the things that they said was you were very helpful to their requests, but down the line they weren't getting what it was that you said your officers would provide. Does that hint at the level of support that you have in the organization, or is everything working all right?
No, I think it's because you know, these officials were also quite busy with the election. They have other things to do. So these are mainly the operations managers of the region. So you would expect one officer looking after a couple of provinces in a region. So every time they are busy running around. So basically, whatever information they wanted was given to my advisor to provide to them, which he did on soft copy.
Now, the resignation of the EAC sort of takes away the last line of defense, if you like, and puts into question the transparency, the accountability, and all that for these elections, and also gives you a lot of added pressure. What's the response to that? Because it has been a subject of debate since it was discussed.
Yeah, it has been the subject of debate, but in the past elections, the electoral commissioners were able to run the elections. And I make reference to the previous elections in 2002, 2007, 2012. We didn't have the EAC, and there was no pressure on the electoral commissioner. Yes, of course, one or two electorates it was able to fail. But in most of the cases, the electoral commissioner made a decision whether to fail or not, and it went through.
Okay. Sir, now because of social media, there's been a lot of scrutiny on the process this time around than any previous elections in the past. And with that has also come instances of either hidden cameras being used, about film-to-film instances where it may border on fraudulent practices. And that people are seeing it on social media as proof of some sort. What's your position? Because the elections here in NCD started off on probably a sour note for NCD, with, of course, Mr. Hetino being detained by police and 184,000 in cash being found, and allegedly an agreement of sorts. Now, you've mentioned this before, but could you just explain what the situation is with Mr. Hetino now, and what will happen after the process?
Yeah, well, let me start off by talking about social media. Social media is good. It provides that scrutiny. But then at some stage, that scrutiny has to be checked out properly, because sometimes you go too far into, you know, a person's individual life, and you'll be talking about that person, and you have to be ready to defend whatever footage you want to provide us all. I think for the mainstream, there are some principles, guiding principles around how you talk and what source document you use. But in social media, as you can see now, is difficult. Yeah, so there is greater transparency. That's still okay. But then when it comes to defending and protecting the integrity of that person, which you are making allegations, sometimes it requires you to go and provide evidence. And some of these people are hiding behind, you know, fake names and all that, and making a lot of news and bringing information out. So that's social media. Sometimes it can be very damaging as well.
So we go back to the case of Mr. Hetino. Was that just a bad decision? Because the weekend before that, you'd been telling polling officials that we'd be paying your allowances straight to the account. And then on Tuesday morning, he's found with all this cash, which he says was meant for polling officials.
With Mr. Hetino's case, I was aware of that arrangement that he was working on. So it's not, unfortunately, it fell into the hands of the police with a big sum. He was supposed to organize what we call meal allowances. So on that day, while NCD officials were polling, they would pack that and distribute them. Yeah, unfortunately, it fell into the hands of the police. When he came in the morning to see me and give me a brief on that, I said, one of the things he told me was that the polling officials are not taking up their post at different locations. So you could imagine Port Moresby. We cannot we cannot conduct election in one electorate and leave out two, or you conduct in two and leave out one. In Moresby, it has to be done together. Yeah, so apparently it happened that way, and I gave him instruction, okay, defer the polling down to Friday so that we can do it together. And you get organized yourself, and then we do polling on Friday, on the 30th. So as he went around to inform the polling stations, some aggrieved people stoned his car, and this was at Chinatown. So he had to escape to save himself, and as he was at the traffic light, and that's when police came, held him, and bested him, dragged him out. He's the returning officer for NCD, and the treatment he was treated was unacceptable in my view.
But you'd agree with security personnel that to find that amount of cash in the election manager's vehicle does raise alarms for them?
It was not illegal. Yeah, as I said, I knew about that, and he was organizing to pack it ready to distribute to polling officials as the meal allowance during the day.
The Commissioner, what is your advice to scrutineers who have complained bitterly on social media, and some have approached traditional media houses of the conduct inside counting centers? Some have complained that there have been instances where ballots are being counted in the absence of scrutineers.
Yeah, scrutineers are important people. They are there to represent the candidates and observe. But it does not mean that they continuously object to all the process. Part of the reason why we are a bit late in Port Moresby electorates are that there's been a lot of objections that delay the process, not just in Port Moresby, but in all parts of Papua New Guinea. And so those that we are seeing earlier results are because they're cooperating, working closely with polling officials and allowing the process to go through. Every time you object, you delay for a couple of hours, or one afternoon, or the entire day. Okay, so I think the electoral process is that we should allow the process to go through. After polling, we go straight into counting, allow counting to take place. And if there is a dispute, people should take it to the Court of Disputed Returns and object that if you have evidence to do that. But the process must be seen to be completed. It must be completed, and declarations made.
Commissioner, we're running out of time, but just one final word. When will the country know how successful this election has been?
Oh yeah, 24th is the date set by the head of state for the return of writs. Under the law, we allowed 21 days for counting. Okay, so when I first advised the head of state, I asked for 16 days. Okay, and that 16 days is up to 24th of July. I'm just watching the figures now, and the writs or declarations made and writs coming in. I hope that we can complete it by 24th. Okay. But if we don't, then I will advise the head of state to extend a little bit, allow for additional 5 days so that it reaches that 21 days period required under the law for counting. So in that way, we can allow others to come in. Okay. But I'm just watching the figures now, hoping that by Friday that should happen. If not by Friday, I'll provide advice to the head of state.
But at the moment, it's the 24th.
Yes, at the moment, it's 24th.
Thank you very much, Electoral Commissioner Patilias Gamato, for being on YourVote 2017.
Thank you, Neville, and thank you, Tidi.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for tonight. It's been a pleasure to have the Commissioner Gamato on the show. And until tomorrow night on YourVote 2017, I'm Neville Choi.
And I'm Titi Gabi. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Good night.